Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Hello there, lovely to see you all. Hello there, so I'm Jane, nice to see you all. The facilitator for your session today is Kim Francis, who I will pass on shortly. We are obviously all working from, or most of us are working from home, so if we do have any disruptions or interruptions, please feel that's absolutely fine. And obviously we will, if you have any connection issues or any technical issues, then please just rejoin via the link that you've been supplied. If you have any questions, we have the chat functionality available, and Kim will be pausing to look at that periodically. If there's something that you will be muted for most of the session. However, obviously, if you want to unmute or ask a question, then please feel free to do so. So without anything else to say, I'm going to hand you over to Kim Francis. Kim, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. What I'm looking at is the presentation that I prepared for earlier in the year, and the latest presentation I didn't pull up. So if you could email me that latest presentation again, when we do a breakout thing, I'll try and get that one up instead, okay?
Do you want me to send it over now, Kim, so you stop sharing and go that way, or are you happy to do it in a break?
In a break, we'll do it then. Okay, right.
Lovely.
Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all. We're starting a little bit late. There's a reason for that. I've got two machines in my office here. I'm on the MacBook at the moment, but we were hoping to do it off the desktop and everything froze. So we've had 25 minutes of sort of mad panic, just trying to work out which machine will deliver. So at the moment, you're seeing slides here that are the ones I prepared for the original outing of this when we had the real world, and it was a face-to-face session, and I did two of these, one in London and one in Sheffield, as you can see here. So what we've done is we have split this one-day session into two half-day sessions, because what we've learned from the life we've been living with Zoom over the last 6 months or so is that it is really quite exhausting and intensive to keep working through these things. Okay, so the content for the early part of this presentation is basically the same. It's just that I've split the activities into the 2 days. Okay, so the content over the 2 days looks like this, but ignore these timings, obviously. So we're going to look at the commissioning side of external moderation to start with, and then we're going to move into the role itself and see how that operates in practice. And I've prepared some case studies which have probably already been sent through to you, and we'll use those as the basis for discussions in our 2 breakout rooms, and we'll be doing that some today and more tomorrow morning. Okay, my street cred on this is fairly extensive. I ran a provision for 11 years or so, and for much of that time I did external moderation, starting with a partnering up with a local provider, and then spreading really far and wide. And I've probably worked with about 20 to 25 providers in an external moderation role, and I'm still working with around 8 or so at the moment. Obviously the world changes all the time. The principles are very much the same, but the big issue at the moment, of course, is how you virtually do external moderation for this year, and how you particularly work around the idea of moving away from grading trainees. And I'll cover that as we move forward. Okay, so what are we trying to do in this session? I'm just going to minimize that. So first of all, my aim is to ensure that you boost your knowledge that you require to facilitate and provide effective external moderation. Models and examples are going to be peppered through this workshop, which we'll be able to talk about and think about. And then as part and parcel of this, I think we can identify some of the misconceptions, pitfalls, and possible dilemmas, and think about the solutions to get around these. Now, the other thing that's worth pointing out at this stage is that there's a big demand for external moderators in the sector. I frequently have to turn work down because I'm working at capacity, and hopefully this workshop will give you the confidence to put yourself forward to become an external moderator. And obviously we have a directory on the NASBIT website, and you could put your name forward for that based on this workshop, and hopefully get involved with it, because it is professionally really rewarding and fulfilling. Okay, so that's something there. We'll now move on to the next slide. So a couple of starting points for you. The first one to think about, of course, is the statutory guidance, and I'm referencing the latest statutory guidance, which doesn't alter C3.4, even though this says 3rd of October 2019. We are talking about the guidance that came out, I think, as recently as early September. And obviously that's capturing some of the issues around the temporary arrangements associated with the various lockdowns and COVID-19. So 3 key points to pull out of this. External moderators should not have any direct involvement with the work of the partnership. This is an interesting one. It needs to be that additional pair of eyes that are looking at the work of the partnership, and particularly the way trainees are assessed in the run-up to being recommended for QTS. Okay. Your working knowledge of how assessment is undertaken across the sector is really important. So we build that up over time, and we do benchmarking activities, and we work with other providers, and we have regular meetings, networks, etc., etc., so that we begin to be able to be in a position to say that what's happening here is fully compatible with what's happening elsewhere. And you need to be confident that the person you've appointed has that knowledge of assessment and programme delivery in more than one setting. Also interesting in the wording in the guidance is this point that's being made about evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of the provision as observed. Now, it does say external moderators might include in their report, so it's not insisting that this happens, but it seems to be a really, really valuable byproduct, if you like, of coming in and moderating standards. And in my experience, providers are really hungry for this external scrutiny, if you like, that is delivered in a professional, warm and objective manner, which contrasts sometimes with other ways that you might find out how well you're doing. Okay. I apologise that I'm just not quite as slick as I'd like to be doing this presentation. As I say, I'm working on quite a small MacBook, which was not the plan originally. Okay, I think we're up to, no, I've gone too far. So, yeah, this one. Another useful source is the Management Handbook for Schools-Led Initial Teacher Training. Now, this was updated in the summer, and I think the latest version is on the website, and it's dated June or July. And again, this section, I did check it very carefully, has not altered in terms of the wording. So it emphasises again that the moderator should be in a position to verify that your final assessment of trainees prior to the award of QTS is consistent and compatible with the standards seen regionally and nationally. You agree in advance what any particular foci would be for the moderator's work, and that enables them to have a clear steer in what they're looking for and what they're focusing on when they start to look at paperwork or have discussions and interviews with trainees, mentors, etc. Timing needs to be thought through pretty carefully, and I'll say more about that in a few minutes. The bottom line with this is that you need to be in a position where the validation that the moderator is providing for you is coming in a timely fashion to support your final assessments, assessment boards, or however you actually do it. So you've got that sort of synchronicity going on between the two processes. Okay, we're going to move to the first opportunity to have some discussion. So I've triggered some questions here for you. You're going to be working in groups of 5, and I will just try and sort out the technical issues so that I've got the actual right presentation on screen, which is the up-to-date version that I prepared a couple of weeks back. Okay. So in a minute, Jane will pop you into the breakout rooms, and we're going to have about 10 minutes or so just to talk through some of these issues in your breakout groups. So,
okay, Kim, can I just ask you to stop screen sharing for a second, and then I can put everyone in the breakout rooms?
Yeah, they'll be able to see the questions, yes?
No, but I will copy them and put them in the chat for everybody.
Thank you. Hello, can you all hear me?
That's it, Kim, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I unmuted and you muted and muted. I was playing
Sorry.
No, Jane, you're doing a fantastic job moving us all about. Apologies to Paula, who was cut off in mid-flow, and very entertaining she was too, talking about mastery of the curriculum, which is something we're looking at, obviously, from the trainees' perspective.
If you do want, Kim, if you do want more time in the breakout rooms, or if you guys feel that you could benefit from more time, then do feel free to use the chat function and let us know, and we can extend the sessions if they're valuable to you.
Thank you, Jane. That's great. I think it was just breaking the ice on that first session, and we've got more things to talk about as we move along. But thanks for that. We will bear that in mind. Okay, I'm going to share screen again. Let's see if this works. And hopefully this is the right screen. Aha, fingers crossed. Yes, those dates look good to me. Right, okay. So that was the first talking point there. So we're going to focus on, let's just get that right. So I think we're here to this slide now. I'm just going to minimize the view, except I've got a screen there that's getting in my way. Great stuff. Right. I think it's really good that you can see my complications with the technology. So I'm demonstrating possibly how not to do a Zoom presentation this morning, but you can have your giggles along the way as we work through that. Okay, so here's a couple of slides about things to consider before commissioning. And I apologise to those people who have already developed quite an expertise in commissioning moderators, but I think these are things that are worth thinking about. And obviously, I'm talking in the perfect world where we could have face-to-face activity, but also we are thinking about what are the implications for that, particularly between now and, shall we say, the end of the spring term, when it's almost certain that whatever we do will be virtual. Okay. So we're looking for sufficient opportunities so that the moderator can validate with some confidence the accuracy and the consistency of the processes that you've got for assessment. So the idea of a sample of trainees, which is a representative cross-section of the people that you're training, in terms of subjects, age phase, etc., etc. And I refer all the time to the notion of internal moderation within your partnership, and the fact that that has thrown up some trainees that you have some concerns about. And I'm not talking about the good, outstanding business, which is all in the past now, but about the pass-fail sort of borderline. I think there is clearly the concept of strong trainees and good working trainees, and then trainees that will need support. Okay, so we have that concept, which I think will still be part of our conversations as we move forward. Observing teaching of trainees. Now, obviously, last year I think I saw one trainee teach because I happened to go into a partnership 10 days before lockdown, out of all the partnerships that I was working with last year. So obviously that gives a different perspective. I'll let Jane deal with that flash up message there. So when we're thinking about virtual conversations and discussions with trainees, we're still looking to triangulate that as far as we possibly can by talking obviously to the mentors and getting the perspective of linked tutors and the partnership itself. But I think the need to see trainees teach, and particularly to see mentors responding to that teaching and having that dialogue, is a cornerstone of this process that we lose temporarily, and it does bring us at a disadvantage. The discussions that we have as moderators with internal assessors and moderators is really, really valuable and necessary. And then also developing an overview of the internal moderation arrangements so that you understand how all the pieces of the jigsaw, if you like, fit together is really important. So it seems to me that those are some key considerations. The sample idea, the idea of how you get to understand the nature of the teaching and the development of the pedagogy of the trainees, discussing with assessors how the evidence is being pulled together to make those judgments, and then seeing that evidence so that you get that understanding. Okay. Okay, other considerations for you as program leaders. There are some obvious things here, but it's worth thinking, how much money do you actually want to devote to this from your budget to make this a viable and worthwhile operation? Okay. Thinking about the number of days, including preparation and report writing time, so that your moderator is able to meet your requirements. In my experience, lots of providers have a very realistic take on this, and others need some discussion about, well, if you actually want that to come out of this, you're going to need to think about investing this sort of activity to make sure it happens. Gathering and advance key documents, so thinking about what it is that you would want your moderator to see in advance, so that they could begin to prepare their thoughts and their ideas about what are the key characteristics of your provision, how it looks to be working on the ground, and that will raise some thoughts and some questions, no doubt. And then obviously you've got to do all the practical liaison with the trainees, the mentors, the tutors, coordinators, head teachers, etc., to draw up a schedule which facilitates quality time for the moderator so that they can get on with the job and do a really thorough and fit for purpose job for you. Okay. Now we are going to move to a second breakout discussion. We've broken the ice now, so hopefully these discussions will be even more useful for you. I know that seeing the questions once you got into the breakout rooms was a little bit of a challenge for some people, so we'll just work through them very quickly, and then I'll ask Jane to take us into the breakout rooms. So first of all, what do you think is an appropriate amount of days' time to ensure effective external moderation for your provision? I know breakout room 1 was talking a little bit about this earlier. Which key documents would you want to have them look at in advance of the first visit, virtual or otherwise? How important is it that your moderator observe trainees and mentors in action? That's as and if circumstances permit. And does this influence the timing of your moderator visits? And how might you work around that if it's not possible for observations to take place? And how do you ensure that your external moderators' perceptions feed into your QA arrangements in the run-up to final recommendation? Okay, so those are the questions. I'll have them to hand. I'm going to pop in and out of the 2 rooms. And Jane, I don't know, I've not dared look at chat, so have you got any issues coming up that people wanted to raise at the moment?
No issues coming up, nothing in the chat at the moment. If you're happy, Kim, if you to stop sharing, I'll pop everyone in the breakout rooms. I'll also send
we'll go a little bit longer, we'll say 15 minutes.
15 minutes, no worries, I'll do that now.
Thank you.
Okay, breakout's coming up.
Right, Richard's unmuted. Good. Right, I think we're getting there.
Do you want speaking, Kim? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's no, we're fine now. I just wanted to make sure that we've got audio and visual.
Yeah, we're fine.
One of the things that I had up in my classroom all those years ago, I'll hold this up to screen and see if you can see it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. So that's why I gave you the option to make noise at the moment. Right. Okay. Right, I'm going to share screen and we'll move on. That was a really useful discussion. I spent my time in one of the breakout rooms and we were talking about a number of issues around timing, around what the lockdown experience taught us about how moderators work, and some of the surprising things that came out of it about the article in terms of talking about their development and their impact on pupils and their progress. All really interesting stuff. Right, I'm going to share screen now. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and I'll just get rid of that as well. So those are the things we were talking about just then, some of them at any rate. And so I will move on to the next screen. Which I think is on. Okay. So at this point, we're starting to think about some of the practicalities. We can gloss through this slide, I think, pretty quickly. But obviously, moderators need to be prepared to have all of this sort of stuff in place. And it depends to a certain extent whether you are working within an organisation and carrying out the external moderator role, or whether you are more freelance in that and doing it off your own bat. So obviously, if you are physically turning up at schools, you would need to be able to prove who you are. You would need to have some evidence that you've gone through relevant safeguarding checks. Insurance cover is something to think about. Your organisation is probably covered with this and therefore it's not a problem, but otherwise you need to consider taking out this, which I do every year. And just on that, you know, not to get too anecdotal, I've had all sorts of issues as an external moderator in schools where I've been placed in potentially very difficult situations, like, you know, a multi-campus secondary school where I've concluded observing a lesson and the teacher has then said, you can find your own way back to reception, can't you? And you have to then very tactfully point out, well, no, that's just not appropriate at all. Moving on to the non-negotiables, and again, this is all based on the luxury of being physically in school and talking to and observing practice in those schools. So I have, certainly up to 2 years ago, quite often been placed in a situation where they thought I would be carrying out a solo observation of a trainee, and sometimes not even a mentor present. And that's an absolute no-no. No leading on lesson feedback to trainees, that's not the role at all. It's to observe the process and to see how the mentors are engaging with their trainees. Sometimes there's a perception, less and less these days, of course, that the moderator has come along to make the ultimate decision. And again, that's not. It's about validating the decisions and the processes that are going on in the partnership. And as I've said, no free to wander scenarios. Agreement around the process and the timeline for submitting, checking and finalising that moderation report. The model that I've adopted over the last 2 or 3 years has been that I have made early visits, sometimes as early as November, December in a particular year, and then a spring term visit, and then certainly 1 or 2 days visit in the summer term. So I've got into the habit of producing a sort of record of visit format along the way, which then feeds into the final report. And in that way, you can offer some timely pointers in year that the provider can think about implementing or changing or developing. And of course, not last but not least, agreeing the professional fees that are going to be charged for the service, unless it's a reciprocal arrangement, which some people do enter into, plus or including expenses. So I have a daily rate, which includes my travel, but if I need to do overnight stays, then I expect the provider to cover that as well. Okay, so just some practical points there. Now, we've touched on this in the discussion groups, I think, quite a lot, but keeping the essentials in focus. So you do need that focus, and most of you have confirmed that you have a focus in mind. Again, it is interesting if I'm appointed as a new moderator, and particularly I worked with a lot of new providers over the last 3-4 years. They're looking sometimes to the moderator to say what they will be interested in focusing on. So you need to have a very clear idea in your partnership what the priorities would be. So I've just highlighted some of the givens. As ever, there's the issue of phonics, knowledge, skills and confidence in teaching phonics, regardless of the main year group that the teaching experiences or year groups that the teaching experiences have been garnered in. Now, we might think that this is an absolute given. Some of us have known that phonics has been an absolute priority for over 10 years in primary. And I know Paula was saying in a previous breakout room that there's always the issue about phonics and secondary and how you cover that. But in my experience, there are still quite often gaps in trainees' confidence with the teaching of early reading and phonics, depending on placements, depending on which year groups they've majored in. And from the curriculum perspective, providers, I think, do need to cover that ground and track and map what it is that experience-wise trainees are gathering throughout the course of their training year. And as an external moderator, it's too easy really to ask the question about confidence and phonics, which I do all the time, and find that you've got trainees that only did it for a short period in November time. They can talk sketchily about the training, which is often very, very high quality. And if you ask them the confidence question, they express concerns and worries. So it's something to be constantly alert about within the primary settings. Also in primary, there's the issue of the opportunity to teach planned sequences across the full primary curriculum. And again, I'm always asking these questions in forum groups and one-to-ones with trainees. What experience have they had of teaching the curriculum, let alone understanding how the curriculum enmeshes and supports and embeds with this particular subjects. And it is interesting that trainees will quite often identify gaps in their knowledge of the whole curriculum. Now, I know this is a hot potato for all of you in terms of the curriculum you are now delivering to trainees this year. But it works on two levels, doesn't it? It works on their exposure and their experience and their confidence around teaching aspects of the curriculum, and then that overview of how the curriculum actually works as a whole. And obviously that feeds into the final bullet point there, which is the breadth and the rationale of the ITE curriculum that you are offering to your primary trainees. In terms of secondary, then the issue is very much around subject knowledge for teaching. And within that, of course, is the issue about the subject curriculum and the continuity of it, pre, current and post phase, where it's going, what the priorities are, what the big ideas are in the subject, and how is that actually being delivered in a systemic and coherent way throughout the year. So one of the most useful things I was able to do as a moderator last year was to bring together subject focus groups, which I did on Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and just talk to them about the subject. My subject is English, so I was able to talk about the big ideas in English. I was able to talk about the relationship between their subject mentors in schools, the subject leads in the partnership, the way the training complemented the experience in school. And that's a very valuable activity to get involved in, and you can gain a lot from that. And what I was able to feed back to partnerships, partnerships told me were particularly useful. And also frequently there is a subject component if you're working with a university for the PGCE. And so picking up that element and seeing how that contributes, and again is fitting into the systemic pattern, is an interesting one to bottom out. And then again, the breadth and the depth and the consistency of the curriculum that you're offering, so that the rationale is clear, and this is around, intent, implementation, and then hopefully the impact coming through. And then I think it's also important that your trainees are picking up a working knowledge of curriculum design, which has to be linked to pupil learning and progress, and the relevance and the frequency of access to up-to-date research. Okay, so that's some thoughts there around the foci that you might identify, not neglecting the obvious things like early reading and phonics. Okay. Now, this is a model that's worked for me, and I would advocate, but people will go at it in different ways. And I know some of you have been talking about this. When I was in the latest breakout room, people were talking about various approaches to this. And I think people were beginning to think that not just relying on a summer term 2-day scenario probably would bring benefits, and I would argue for that quite strongly. So There is the suggestion that a moderator should be appointed for 3 consecutive years. I sometimes will do 1 more year on top of that, and I think you can argue that familiarity does not make it a cosy arrangement. I've not found that to be the case in my experience, but I don't think the 3-year rule needs to be hard and fast, but it's a good rule of thumb. Okay, go for a minimum 3-day moderation process. I mean, there are 1 or 2 rich partnerships around, so I have done as much as 6 or 7 days with a partnership in a year, but typically it's 2 or 3 days, and occasionally I come across a partnership that would only want me for 1 day, which I try and discourage, not just because I'm looking to make some more money out of it, but because I think that gives a very limited perspective. So day 1, I think, frequently will be around familiarization and introductory discussions, and it's usually really useful if you can do face-to-face or certainly through Zoom to have those conversations, which will be based on some of the documentation that has been sent through in advance, so that you're having discussions about the priorities that are being introduced this year, the progress that's been made with the ITE curriculum, the special characteristics of your provision, which is something that I think is writ large now. What is it that's unique and special about the way you do your teacher training? And can you articulate that, and is that clear in your documentation? Because I think we're still in a situation where we're developing that, and I do come across partnerships that are so deeply embedded in what they're doing day to day that they haven't fully appreciated what it is that's very special about the way they do things, which again, that external moderator can draw attention to, so that they can highlight that and make it an even stronger aspect of their documentation, if you like, and the messages that they put out to the partnership. So you'd also hope that you can visit a partner school and observe some of the SCITS processes in action. And if you can't do that, then talking to a representative sample over Zoom or Microsoft Teams is a very useful add-on to that. And as I say, a record of visit document would come out of that within a couple of weeks or a week or so, which you would keep to feed into your final report. And then I'd suggest that days 2 and 3 would involve visits to a range of partnership schools to shadow mentors, observing trainees, providing feedback, review assessment processes in action. And you can do most of that virtually. But as I say, the one downside of that is there is no substitute for seeing trainees, teaching, and mentors, having that professional dialogue with them after the lesson has taken place. But again, some of you I know are working with video clips and using those quite creatively to help with that process. There's also the additional option for the moderator to attend the assessment board meeting to observe the process and provide a verbal report. That's subject to the moderator's availability, of course, and the budget that you're working with, and the way you actually QA your process for final recommendation. But I have frequently attended, virtually and in reality, those assessment boards. And I guess, again, in my experience, so it's dangerous, this is not always the norm, it is helpful to help you get the most out of those assessment boards in terms of looking for the scrutiny that you want, that you naturally want to take place, as that extra dimension to make sure that the award of QTS is a rigorous and consistent process. Okay, and I've just put on the small print there, in subsequent years, day 1 could be retained to work out improvements from year to year and look at those, and also look at new foci as they emerge, so that you make it a 3-day process model embedded. Okay. Now, we are roaring ahead, I think. Let's just have a look at the. Okay. Yeah, this slide, I don't propose to talk too much about this, but this is just a practical suggestion for the way you might put together a school visits program. Okay. I am well used now as a moderator to being given guest access to portals and to looking around at the way trainees are utilising that, the way the systems are organised. And I'm also able to talk to trainees about how they find those systems. I think perhaps you will all have experienced from time to time online systems that are a little bit inflexible and not actually helping trainees manage their workload and produce the evidence that you want them to produce in a seamless and manageable way. Okay. So again, I'm not going to talk through that, but that's just some ideas there. And of course, this is assuming that school visits can actually take place. So move on to the next slide. Okay. Just some pointers here about the business of producing your report. I've said already that you'll agree with the programme lead about the timing for the report. Often moderators have got day jobs and they're very, very busy, so there needs to be a reasonable expectation on both sides about when the report will appear, what format you want it to be in. And often I will produce either a verbal report or a headlines which can feed into board meetings, and then the full report to follow a little bit later down the line. So it's good to negotiate those. But I think what is particularly important is to be clear about the audience that you're writing for. Obviously, programme leader, but also there's a wider audience that will be looking at your report. And therefore, you need to be aware of those people in that audience. So the management and assessment boards, inspectors potentially, so that you tailor the language and the level of detail that you're putting in. And I would always propose that you present a draft report, and that's understood by both parties, and then discussion can take place about a number of issues around it before it becomes a final report, because you want it to be of maximum benefit to that partnership. So structures, fairly typical things here, introductory paragraphs, but trying to capture the key characteristics of that provision: size, age phases, numbers, schools, hubs involved, history, most recent inspection outcome, and briefly the scope, the foci for your moderation work that season. A description of the moderation activities is useful to include, so that gives you an overview of the visits to the schools that were made, the perusal of the evidence and other key documents, the meetings that took place. Percentage of trainees seen is quite an interesting thing to include, because that varies widely. I know some people think there are rules about this, but in actual fact, there's a lot of flexibility, and you agree it to make sure it's a quality process rather than a quantity process. Okay. This final sub-bullet is obviously the most important one: clear indication of the moderation outcome, which unambiguously states that assessment processes are accurate, consistently applied, and compatible with other provision you have seen. I'll put hopefully in brackets, because you'd be in a very, very difficult situation if you couldn't actually say that. But the report needs to make it crystal clear that you have come to that conclusion. So that needs to be very clearly highlighted within the report. Okay. Reporting protocols, a little bit more on this. So further aspects to the structure, strengths and areas for improvement. I'm saying that obviously you would want to support all of the statements with examples from your observations, discussions, etc. This is why your note taking is vitally important, because you gather perceptions, you're trying to triangulate them wherever you possibly can, but sometimes you get very strong perceptions from a couple of trainees which may well not be typical. You know, you have to look at the context of all of that. And you have to find a way of communicating that so that you are making it clear that you can source it anonymously, but it was actually said to you, and it may or may not be a broader indication of issues across the partnership. You're looking to try and balance between the strengths and the areas for improvements. Obviously, if you look at that section in its rough draft format, and you've got, say, 3 strengths and about 8 or 10 areas for improvement, that is giving a message. So you're looking to think very clearly and carefully about the strengths, and also what would be the key areas for improvement. So you've got a sort of balance going on there. And then the usual concluding paragraphs, courtesies and thanks, because people in partnerships are incredibly open, obliging, friendly to moderators, and without that cooperation you really couldn't do the job. Other thoughts? Well, obviously try to ensure that you adopt the language and terminologies used by the provider. I know I've had moderators' reports on my provision which just slightly irritated me because the moderator were using the language they were familiar with and not the language that's very clearly in your own provision. So try to pay that courtesy of using the terminology that exists in that partnership. And as I said earlier, reports should always be presented as a draft, and you can enter then into discussions about factual accuracy and also possible shifts of emphasis, so that the programme leader can ensure that the report is having the sort of impact they'd like it to have on people in the partnership, management boards, etc. And then finalise, submit and send your bill. And I make it a point of honour, I don't put the invoice in until the final report's gone over. Call me old fashioned, but there you go. Okay, now I make it 5 to 11, which means I think it might be sensible to have a comfort and coffee break for about 10-15 minutes. How does that sound, Jane?
That sounds perfect. Rihanna's just asked on the chat, will we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Yes, Rihanna, this will be sent out to you after the training sessions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good stuff. Right, let's take 15 minutes to regroup, have a bit of fresh air if it's not raining, a coffee, a top up, and we'll see you at 10 past 11.
Perfect. See you all then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Jane, I'm back.
Excellent. Over to you.
Thank you. Now then, good to have a bit of a break from it. Now, in terms of timing, folks, I know the session is scheduled to finish at 12:30. I think we're going to beat that, which is probably useful for all of you. The rationale here at NASBIT has been to split these sessions over 2 mornings so that you can get on with the day job as well, and also concentration levels are not too tight. If I'd really thought this through, it probably would have been useful to build into the coffee break the reading time, which is coming up next, because I think we're now going to think about the first of the case studies. Jane, can I just check, all the delegates have got the case studies already, yes?
Absolutely. They were sent out by email first thing this morning, just as we started the session. Okay, well, in terms of today, folks, we're going to spend a bit of time now thinking about case study 1, West Shear ITT partnership.
these are all real reports that I have worked on or produced or had access to over recent years. And obviously I've anonymized them for the purposes of this workshop. So you're going to get a little bit of reading time, and I think probably 10 minutes to just read through the report. And then we'll go into the breakout rooms so that we can discuss some of the key elements of this particular report. And then when we pull all these thoughts together at the end of the morning, we will come to the end of part 1 of the session. And then tomorrow we've got some other case studies to look at, and also some more thinking time about how to do all this virtually. Okay, so in terms of things to look out for as you're reading through this report, there's the issue of the logistics, the structure and the parameters that you think the reporter, the moderator, was working towards. There's the section on strengths and areas for improvement. And again, I put the prompt there. What does this tell you? What do these tell you about the health of this particular skit? And then how effective is the report overall? So are the messages clear? Is the report sufficiently detailed? And how useful do you think it will be to the provider in helping them to move their provision forward? Okay, so best way to do this, Jane, we're giving reading time now, just to let that happen for 10 minutes, and then we'll set up the breakout rooms when I give the prompt. Does that sound okay?
That sounds good. So I'll put a timer on for 10 minutes and then we can set up the breakout rooms on your cue, Kim.
Thank you. Cheers. Brilliant. Thank you. Well, I hope that's given everybody the chance to read through that report, which, as you can see, is from the semi-recent past. And is a real report that I produced actually for a provider that I was working with. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to pop into the breakout rooms, and we're going to give you 25 minutes to talk through some of the issues here. And then we'll pull together for a sort of mini plenary, and that will be the end of the morning session. So I'm thinking we might finish half an hour early at around 12 o'clock, if that's okay with people. All right. Thanks, Jane.
Sorry, Kim, can I just confirm you said 25 minutes? Is that correct?
25 minutes on the discussion.
Lovely. Opening up the rooms now.
I'm unmuted, so I'm just expecting, I'll just see if I can get you all on gallery view. Yeah. Okay. Right. I hope you found it useful to look at a fairly real example of an approach to producing a moderation report. Interesting to get feedback from you on 2 levels. One, the issues that that provider was grappling with at the time, and it has that historic element to it in that sense, and also the usefulness and any shortcomings in the way that I put the report together at the time. And I take those on board because we want to produce a perfect and absolutely fit for purpose report. And there are elements to it that could be improved. And I think a couple of things that have come to my attention. One would be, it's a primary only skit, and I'd not actually marketed how many were on 3 to 7 and how many on 5 to 11. I had that information, and I frequently put that in to that contextual paragraph, but it isn't actually there, and somebody raised that, so thank you for raising that. That's very helpful. And secondly, was I always validating the statements that I was making with the evidence that I gathered along the way? And as I said to both groups, obviously I always make the point that additional notes were taken, so there's a longer raw document behind all of this, and you make a judgment about what your provider actually wants in terms of detail and in terms of how the key points are arrived at. So that would vary, I think, for me from report to report, depending on the context I was working with and the needs of the providers. Right. Anybody want to raise anything about this first session? Any questions, concerns, or worries?
Yeah.
Richard.
It's more of a general point. It's just around phonics. I always come back to phonics. And this idea of being confident, that word confident teaching phonics, or the word competent around teaching phonics. And I don't know whether other people have had this conversation amongst yourselves, but confidence is one thing doing something, but competence is another. And how, as an external moderator, even with our own provisions, really just unpicking whether our trainees are competent as opposed to confident around teaching phonics.
Well, now then, we're probably not going to finish till after 12 months.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's a really good point. Now, maybe somebody there's got the answer to that one. I don't think I have. Certainly, the package, the totality of the exposure that the trainees have encountered gives you some indication of their potential competence level. Rarely as a moderator are you going to see trainees teaching phonics. I don't think, maybe once I've seen that in all the time I've been doing this. So you're relying on what the evidence is telling you. But I think the other element, if we talk about the confidence, there's a role to play for all of us running our provision in terms of teaching our trainees what to say about where they are with phonics. Frequently, trainees, if you like, shoot themselves in the foot when they're talking to me as a moderator, which makes you think they might also do that if they were talking to an inspector. And yet, often we know they know more than they think they know, and they can do more than they think they can do. But I think it comes back to the curriculum that you're offering to them around early reading and phonics, and the timing and the sequencing of that throughout your program, because that should be competence and confidence building. If it's not something that seems to have happened predominantly in term one, and they've gone very rarely near it in terms of professional exposure later on. Don't know, does anybody else want to come in on that?
I don't know that it solves the problem, but something we do because we have exactly this challenge with confidence versus competence is with all of our primary trainees, we have a phonics tracker that goes throughout the whole of their first year, and it tracks different phonics activities in the year that they do through their training or specific sorry, my dog is chewing really loudly in the background, which is really annoying. It tracks kind of where they've had training on phonics, or where they've had developmental conversations based on phonics, or where an observation has been on phonics and the feedback from that, so that they have a very concrete record of their development in phonics that they can look back on, and they can see how they've developed. Because I think one of the things, because they're salaried employment-based route, is they're very busy and they forget how much they've developed because they're doing it all the time. So to give them something that tracks it for them so they can look back on it and reflect on how much they've developed seems to help them to see their competence, rather than, oh, but I'm still worried about phonics because I still think I've got more to learn, which they probably have, but they are much better than they were at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Are we all tracking the phonics journey in the way that Beth just described?
Maybe
Yeah, we do it through reflective practice. We set a paper and reflective practice. So.
Yeah, it was interesting reflecting on it, maybe not as rigorously as what's Beth saying. So maybe it's something to consider. We do kind of subject knowledge audits across the board, but is that giving us, like you say, that opportunity for reflection that we want to make them aware of what they've done, not just kind of letting them know where they are.
Yeah, we've got a phonics workbook that goes through, but again, I think we could perhaps be a bit more explicit, like as Beth suggested.
Yeah, and empowering them to talk with confidence about what they've done.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Okay, all right. Anybody want to raise anything else at this point? So, as I say, tomorrow, hopefully we'll be more gremlins free and I will be more relaxed from the get-go. And what we're doing is we're going to look at some further case studies and practical approaches to moderation, and also think a little bit more about virtual moderation and the pluses and minuses of all of that. So I hope you found it useful this morning. As I say, I sent an apology to all of you about the sort of pure panic I was in at 9:30, but I've recovered somewhat since then, and I've really enjoyed talking to you, particularly in the breakout rooms, and I hope you found it useful and thought-provoking. Okay. Jane, we're going to close it down in a moment or two.
Okay.
There's just one delegate I'd like to have a quick extra professional dialogue with. Okay. So if that person and I stay on when you let other people leave the meeting or ask them to leave the meeting, that would be much appreciated. Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
No
All
worries.
right. Thanks, team. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. See you tomorrow.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Kim. Bye all.
Great to see you all.
Yeah,
See
thanks
you
a lot.
tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.